Right, joining me now is the Australian's political editor, Shanahan, live from Canberra. Dennis, I wanted to start off tonight discussing what happened in the UK over the weekend. Because sadly, I think for modern Western countries, terror is always there. It's never far away from the national debate and circumstances. I mean, it won't be the last time, sadly, we see a terror attack. But it comes at a time we're having a debate in Australia between the left and the right on border issues, which is Medivac. And over there, in the height of a political campaign, there's a lot of debate between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn about can you rehabilitate these types of individuals. And there were law changes made about weakening the sentencing regime brought in by the Labor Party that enabled this man to be put out on the streets with nothing but an ankle bracelet, as I understand. These are where the schism right around the world between the left and the centre-right is on issues like this and broadly border protection.
Well, you're exactly right, Peter. This is a real problem for democratic countries around the world. What do you do with somebody that has been convicted of a terror offence, given a sentence, and shows no signs of rehabilitation, or can give false signs of rehabilitation? And what do you then say? Well, look, it's no longer safe to let somebody out of jail, even if they've served their full term. So you have a bank of people around the world in jail who have been convicted of terrorist crimes, and the question is, can you ever let them out? And the point is, some of these offences don't carry life sentences, real life sentences. And Donald Trump's been making this point about the terror people that they have in jail in the US, and he wants them to go back to Germany and back to France and say, well, you go and look after them, because this is an ongoing issue for all of these countries. And Australia is faced with the same thing. We now have people sentenced to jail terms, and at some stage those jail terms come to an end. And then you have to make a decision to say, well, do we let them out? And so the whole issue of dealing with convicted terrorists is that it is an ongoing, lifelong issue. And from the evidence we've seen from London, the only barrier to this man carrying out the murders that he did was that they knew where he was because he had an anklet on. So that's clearly no way to deal with the issue, but it's one that is going to have to be confronted, and it is one that we in Australia have to confront as well.
Yeah, Dennis, we spend $50 million in Australia on de-radicalisation programs meant to rehabilitate someone back into society or prevent the radicalisation of young people. We know from a recent Lowy report out in the last fortnight that they argue de-radicalisation is shown not to work. In all the empirical evidence tracking 170-odd known terrorists in Australia, some in jail, some not, the de-radicalisation programs don't work. This man went through the prison system. He was involved in rehab programs. He was put out on the street. You know, again, they thought they were monitoring them. When I've been in Britain, and I've gone previously, my old role, and got the briefings from British intelligence and surveillance authorities, they cannot possibly, electronically or with human intelligence, keep track of even a small percentage of the risk that they have out on the streets in Britain in relation to terrorism. Is this going to be the real scourge of our lifetime, in that it will be something we just have to factor in, the inevitability, sadly, of terror attacks on streets in Western countries?
Well, it's a bit like the eternal question of capital punishment. No reasonable person supports capital punishment, but the alternative for some of these crimes and some of these people who are convicted, the only way you can say we can know for sure how to protect the public, because after all, this man who committed the murders in London had recanted. He had said, yeah, no, he'd made a mistake. Others have made similar recants in Australia, and yet how do we believe them? And it is impossible to monitor the large number of people who are seen as threats. In the Australian today, we had a piece written by the former person who reviewed the rehabilitation, the de-radicalisation program, and he just said it was woeful. It couldn't work and wouldn't work. So there is an insurmountable problem. There are other countries, Singapore for instance, where they have very good de-radicalisation programs and so on, but there's also an element, a number of people convicted there of terrorism crimes who will never be let out of jail. So it looks like we're coming to the stage.
Just on that, in Singapore, when I was there with the former Prime Minister, meeting a lot of their officials to look at their de-radicalisation programs, an official pulled me to one side and said, you know, though, Peter, the only thing that actually works is detention. That's the only time we're safe. It's with detention, and it's detention where you never let them out.
That's it. That's the only guarantee. And so can we live with that? And does it mean someone who may be a stupid 14 or 15-year-old or a 16-year-old gets drawn into some conspiracy and then is convicted of something, given a few years' sentence, but that effectively becomes a life sentence? This is the thorniest issue of all about the detention of terrorists, convicted terrorists and suspected terrorists, and Donald Trump's put his finger on it. He just wants to send them all back to where they came from and then let them deal with it, not the US. It's not something we can do, but it's the same issue with the so-called jihadi brides. Australian citizens, what do we do?
It does, and it presents a challenge for democracies where we believe in rule of law, where we believe in habeas corpus and all the evidentiary rules once these people front up to courts in Australia, but we don't have the evidence of their crimes enough to satisfy courts here in Australia, because to get that information, and this was something we've confounded the governments in the past, to get it out of war zones, to collect that sort of evidence out of Syria on ISIL and other terrorists, Al-Qaeda, is incredibly difficult. And of course, you know, they come home, they get the benefit of the doubt, and we see situations like we saw in Britain. I want to move on to another topic, because I want your analysis here. Two things in particular. Pauline Hanson last week, I think she broke a covenant of trust there with the government. I think it'll be hard for them to trust her going forward. What was the blood price, do you think, or was there a blood price in relation to her vote? There's talk today that the CFMEU will not campaign against her in the upcoming Queensland election. I know in the past the CFMEU have provided manpower to man booths, to hand out how to votes and other things for some of the minor parties. Do you think that's part of the mix? Do you think it's donations, or do you think she genuinely had a change of mind, bearing in mind the government gave her everything she wanted in terms of amendments?
Well, look, in the first place, I think Pauline Hanson did herself a great disservice and a great deal of harm. She had given her word that she would support the changes for the Ensuring Integrity Bill. She actually had all her amendments passed. The government kept their side of the bargain. They were prepared to change the bill to get her vote, and in the end she reneged on that. Now, for the people who she says previously that she supported, that the people she fought for, the disenfranchised, the people who didn't like political games in Canberra, they are the people she betrayed. And look, there doesn't have to be a straight quid pro quo for blood money on a deal. All we have to do is see what she wants out of something. All we have to do is see what the CFMEU wants out of it, and you put the two together, and the result was that Pauline Hanson broke her word to the government. So I think she has done herself a great deal of damage amongst her own supporters, and I wouldn't want to trust the CFMEU when it comes to politicking in the Queensland state election.